10,000 Stitches. The author, Olivia Atwater. Prologue. Euphemia Reeves was a very irritable young woman. This would have surprised most of the other servants at Hartfield. In fact, if you had asked the esteemed housekeeper, Mrs. Sedgwick, she might have told you that Effie was nearly the ideal sort of chambermaid. As far as Mrs. Sedgwick was aware, Effie never shirked her duties and always conducted herself with ideal composure. Mrs. Sedgwick would have been shocked and horrified to hear the words that currently spilled from Effie's lips. No consideration whatsoever, none. Effie hissed to herself, as she scrubbed down the wooden floors of the entryway for the third time that day. Mud caked the floorboards once again, as the men of the family had come tromping inside one by one from the nasty winter weather outside. Ought to be against the law to go out ridin' when there's mud and snow. Lord Culver and his younger brother, Mr Edmund Ashbrooke, had little awareness of the spectacular messes that they left behind. Effie never would have gotten away with leaving her boots on back home, but Lord Culver, more than 15 years her senior, was so used to messes magically disappearing behind him that he saw little use in peeling off his own boots until he'd already tramped up to his room. Some poor laundry maid would soon have to scrub his entire outfit once he'd pulled it off. "There's no use gettin' angry," Effie's mother used to chide her. "It'll just get you into trouble. You can think all the angry thoughts you want, but they've got to stay inside your head." Muddy, puffed up popinjays, the lot of 'em. Effie muttered at her brush. "Well, birds are smarter, aren't they? At least they clean their own feathers." The words tumbled out beneath her breath today, instead of staying in her head. "Sorry, Mum," she thought apologetically. "I've run out of patience again." Normally, when Effie became this cross, she went to find some convenient mending. She'd always found needlework to be remarkably soothing. But the Ashbrookes were hosting yet another ball tomorrow evening, and the staff was running about like mad trying to prepare for it once again. Lady Culver had only married Lord Culver last year in London, and ever since he'd returned with her, she'd been determined to take charge of the household to run things her way. Unfortunately, Lady Culver's way mostly seemed to involve firing any servant who happened to displease her and refusing ever to replace them. The way Lady Culver goes on, she must think she's hired a bunch of magicians instead of a bunch of servants, Effie thought tiredly. She ought to put that in her next advertisement. Maybe England's court magician will show up and do her laundry. This thought, of course, only made Effie even more cross than ever. She sighed and dug into her memory, searching for a nursery rhyme. The cook used nursery rhymes to time her preparations, and Effie had taken to using them as a method of last resort to calm her nerves. Effie narrowed her eyes and carefully recited at the floor. "Wind the bobbin up. Wind the bobbin up. Pull, pull, clap, clap, clap. Wind it back again." The long frustration of the day dimmed a bit beneath the monotonous rhyme, and Effie relaxed her shoulders minutely. She had just started the verse again, leaning into the cleaning once more, when she was interrupted. "Lydia. Are you about, Lydia?" Mrs. Sedgwick's thin, reedy voice snapped through the air in the hallway behind Effie. "For goodness sake, has anyone seen Lydia? I haven't the time to be tracking down every maid in this household." Effie took a deep, steadying breath and tried to erase the scowl from her face as Mrs. Sedgwick came around the corner. The stern old housekeeper strode out towards Effie. The wooden soles of her half-boots made a neat clipping noise as she went. Mrs. Sedgwick was in particularly immaculate form today, with her dark hair pulled back into a tight bun upon her head. She was dressed in her black silk housekeeper's dress, of course, for she was inordinately proud of the thing, and she preferred never to be seen in any other clothing. "Effie," Mrs. Sedgwick said. "Have you seen Lydia? Her ladyship would like the piano in the ballroom dusted again. She says she can still hear the dust in it." Effie flinched at the suggestion. "We've already dusted that drat piano twice," she thought crossly. Perhaps someone ought to test her ladyship's hearing, in case she's going deaf. But what Effie actually said aloud was, "Mr. Allen sent Lydia to air out another of the guest rooms, Mrs. Sedgwick." The housekeeper's eyes flared with irritation. "Mr. Allen did," she observed icily. "Well, well. And when did the maids of the house start taking orders from the butler?" Effie swallowed down a frustrated sigh. Mrs. Sedgwick had been at odds with their new butler, Mr. Allen, ever since he'd been hired on at Hartfield. Lady Culver had fired the old butler, Mr. Simmons, but since Hartfield really could not get by without a butler, Lady Culver's family had insisted on sending Mr. Allen to take over the job. Mr. Allen had been a very well-regarded butler in London, before he deigned to take over Hartfield. Everyone knew that he was only there by some noble relative's earnest request. Unfortunately, Mr. Allen's immediate reorganization of the household had infuriated Mrs. Sedgwick, who was quite used to working with Mr. Simmons and not at all fond of this newer, more refined interloper. Lord only knew who was originally to blame for the initial spat between the butler and the housekeeper, but the rivalry had grown worse and worse as the weeks went by, until even the stable hands found themselves forced to choose an allegiance to one or the other. "I don't know much more than that, Mrs. Sedgwick," Effie said. "But Lydia should be upstairs, if you're lookin' for her." Effie scrubbed at a patch of mud on the floor, keeping her eyes carefully on the ground. "Ordering around the maids." Mrs. Sedgwick huffed again. "Oh, that nasty man, getting above himself. Lady Culver will hear about this, see if she doesn't." Effie did not respond this time, though she was sure that Mrs. Sedgwick wanted her to do so. She had learned that if she did not react to the housekeeper's dramatic pronouncements, Mrs. Sedgwick would eventually give up and go seek out one of the more gossip-friendly maids. Mr. Allen might well spoil the ball, at this rate, Mrs. Sedgwick added insistently. "I tell you, I shall not hesitate to lay the blame upon him if he does." "Yes, Mrs. Sedgwick," Effie murmured obediently. The housekeeper thinned her lips to a neat line. "Well, I am buried in work," she said. "I cannot simply stand here gabbing at housemaids all day." Mrs. Sedgwick said this as though it were Effie who had started their conversation, and not her at all. "Yes, Mrs. Sedgwick," Effie repeated carefully. But her mouth had begun to twitch in annoyance, and she knew that she didn't dare look up for fear of showing her irritation on her face. Mrs. Sedgwick turned on her heel and started for the hallway again, the wooden clip-clop of her boots slowly faded behind her. As soon as she had gone, Effie let out a long, weary breath. "None of us has time to gab, of course," Effie muttered at her brush. "Just imagine that. Time." She glanced at the bucket of water next to her and sighed, shoving to her feet. She was going to have to spread fresh sand over the entryway all over again. The front door opened abruptly. Effie staggered back with a surprised shriek. Her foot caught on the bucket of water, and she found herself suddenly toppling backwards. "Good God," a man exclaimed. A strong, sturdy arm snaked around Effie's waist just in time to keep her from plummeting downward. Two warm brown eyes blinked down at her. A pleasant, sturdy scent engulfed her, sandalwood, Effie thought, and just a hint of the outside. She colored as she recognized Mr. Benedict Ashbrooke's strong, handsome features. "Ah," she squeaked. I'm so very sorry." Benedict blinked again. His dark hair was pleasantly mussed and scattered with melting snow. Benedict was the youngest brother of the Ashbrooke family. Effie had always said that he was also the most handsome brother, or at least, she had quietly thought as much, on those few occasions when Benedict had come home to visit. Now that he stared down at her with that sheepish smile, holding her in his strong, warm arms, Effie found herself struck utterly dumb. "Nothing to worry about," Benedict assured her. "I should be the one apologizing, I'm sure." He set Effie carefully back onto her feet, though his hands lingered on her shoulders with a hint of concern. He knitted his brow at her. "I swear I know your face, miss. Have we met before? Are you staying here for one of Lady Culver's balls, perchance?" Effie blinked dazedly. "For the ball?" she thought. What on earth does he mean by that? "I should think you do know me, yes," Effie said. She shouldn't have dared to be so pert, but her heart was still racing in her chest, and her head felt warm and muddled from his nearness. "I knew I must have," Benedict said ruefully. "Do you know, I am terrible with names, but I normally remember far better when there's such a pretty face attached." Effie widened her eyes. "I'm sure I don't know what's going on at all anymore," she thought. "Benedict, good heavens. Lady Culver's voice called down from the stairs, and Effie glanced up towards her. The matron of the household was barely older than Effie herself, but the terrible scowl that currently lay upon her fine, aristocratic features made her seem more like old Mrs. Sedgwick. "Why did no one tell me to expect you?" Lady Culver asked impatiently. "And for that matter, why are you exchanging pleasantries with the help?" Benedict knitted his brow. He glanced back toward Effie, who shrank with embarrassment beneath his gaze. As she did, she caught sight of the old, fraying lace attached to the neckline of her dress. "I am wearing one of Lady Culver's old hand-me-down dresses," Effie realized belatedly. "But really, no one with half a brain ought to mistake me for a lady." "Oh," Benedict said. "I see." He managed another helpless smile at Effie. "Well," he told her, "I suppose I have made fools of us both. Do forgive me, miss." "You're forgiven, of course," Effie mumbled out. It was the only thing she could think to say in the moment. Benedict cleared his throat and looked back up the stairs towards Lady Culver. "I sent a letter to Thomas," he told her. "But I suppose he forgot to pass it on, did he?" Lady Culver narrowed her eyes. "So he did," she said. "Well, Benedict, you are lucky that we have aired out the rooms. There may yet be an extra for you, in spite of my husband's oversight." She paused. "There is a ball tomorrow evening, however. You will have to make yourself available to the young ladies for dancing, or else we shall never hear the end of it." Benedict chuckled at that. There was a warm, earthy sound to his laugh that Effie suddenly found very difficult to ignore. "I enjoy dancing," he told Lady Culver. "So that is no imposition at all." Benedict nearly took off up the stairs, but he paused thoughtfully, and glanced down at his boots. He took one careful step back and pried his muddy boots from his feet, one after the other. "There's really no need to make extra work for you, is there?" he said to Effie apologetically. Benedict headed up the stairs before she could find the wherewithal to respond. As his figure disappeared once more, Effie was struck by a horrified realization. "Oh, bother," she said. "I think I've just fallen in love." Chapter 1. "Even Mr. Allen thinks Lady Culver ought to hire more servants, for the work she has us doin'," Lydia sniffed, as she stabbed at the sock in her lap with a needle. The two of them were settled onto the cots in their shared room below stairs, working on a quiet bit of mending just before bed. "I heard him sayin' it to George, when he didn't see me round the corner. Mr. Allen said it's a crime how little she pays the rest of us, too." Effie shook her head worriedly. "Mr. Allen ought to keep his voice down better," she said, as she stitched up a tear in the silk hem in front of her. "All them fancy references of his won't save him if Lady Culver hears he said somethin' the least bit bad about her." "Well, he's right, isn't he?" Lydia said impatiently. "Look at us, Effie. After midnight, and we've only just now gotten to our own mending." She knitted her brow as she considered Effie. "But, oh no, what is that, Effie? That can't be Mrs. Sedgwick's dress. I thought you'd already mended it a few weeks back." Effie sighed heavily. "It is Mrs. Sedgwick's dress," she said. "She wants it fixed for the ball, just in case some guest catches sight of her. Mrs. Sedgwick said she doesn't trust anyone else to stitch it up for her." "Well, you do have the very neatest stitches," Lydia sighed. "But really, Effie, you ought to turn people down every once in a while, or else you'll end up doin' everyone's mending." Effie pressed her lips together at that. Earlier that day, just after that strange incident with Benedict, she'd had a lovely few minutes where she'd felt as though she were floating her way through the manor. But a full day of running breathlessly to and fro had crushed that tiny sense of elation back into her usual, miserable frustration. "I can't just say no to Mrs. Sedgwick," Effie mumbled. She stuffed her frustration down with an effort. A few more stitches calmed her mood slightly, though they did little for the growing headache behind her eyes. "If either Mrs. Sedgwick or her ladyship decides they want rid of me, I'll be back at home and talking food off my mum's table." "She can't afford that." Lydia let out a disgusted noise. "Oh, and they would, wouldn't they?" she muttered. "You remember when poor Lucy got pregnant, and they tossed her right out on her behind? I heard Lady Culver gave Lucy not 1 cent, not even a carriage ride home. Lydia shook her head, as though to rid herself of the unpleasant memory. Anyway, imagine bein' a housekeeper. We could have other servants doin' all our chores as well, couldn't we? I bet Mrs. Sedgwick is already asleep in her bed, while you mend her skirts. Another shot of anger jolted through Effie at that. She hunched down over the dress, clenching her jaw. It doesn't do any good to get angry, Effie reminded herself. I can't change things, so getting angry will just get me into trouble. It isn't worth complainin', Effie muttered. Here, let's talk about something nicer. Did you see that Mr. Benedict came home today? Lydia knitted her brow. Is that nicer? She asked. He'll be another member of the family underfoot for another awful ball. Effie colored. He isn't all that bad, she said. And at least he's pleasant to look at, isn't he? Lydia grinned. Ooh, she said. Have you got a tendre for him, Effie? I do not, Effie lied stiffly. That'd be silly of me, wouldn't it? Lydia shrugged and set aside her sock. I don't know, she said. It's sometimes nice to dream. And, if we haven't got the time to sleep sometimes, at least we can still daydream. Effie stared down at the dress in her lap. Yes, she said softly. I guess there's that. The single candle on the table soon burned down, and Effie was forced to set aside the gown. As she closed her eyes and tried to sleep, she found herself dreaming of warm brown eyes and a pleasant, heart-tingling smile. Effie didn't have very long to dream. 6 in the morning came around in no time at all, whereupon Lydia began to shake Effie by the shoulder, hissing about the fireplaces. The two of them rushed to get their usual day-to-day chores out of the way, grimly aware that last-minute preparations for the ball would interrupt their schedule all day long. Surely enough, Lady Culver soon began calling for maids to help with her hair, and Mrs. Sedgwick dispatched Effie to polish all of the mirrors in the ballroom one last time. By the time Lydia joined Effie to lay out the last flowers, neither of them had managed breakfast, or even a quick noontime snack. But the guests soon began to arrive, and there was still no time for rest. Mrs. Sedgwick hustled into the ballroom from a side door, grasping at Lydia and Effie's shoulders. Would someone please go check on Cookie? The housekeeper demanded breathlessly. Where are the punch trays at? Lydia closed her eyes with the slightest groan. Effie fought back her instinctive retort, perhaps they got forgotten along with our breakfast, and pasted on a polite smile. I'll go check, Mrs. Sedgwick, she said, with an infinite patience that she did not feel at all. At least I might pick up something to eat while I'm down in the kitchens, Effie thought. Effie slipped out the side door, down into the passages which led below stairs. Excited laughter trickled in from the entryway, where the guests still mingled. A strange stab of longing went through her chest as she imagined herself standing in that front entryway, instead of down below it. Perhaps Benedict was up there, mingling with the guests. If Effie had truly been the noble lady for which he'd mistaken her, she would be there with him, dressed in her evening best, or rather, she would be dressed in something akin to Lady Culver's evening best. Effie imagined herself in a lovely cream gown, with plenty of lace and embroidered embellishments. Benedict would smile upon seeing her, and ask whether she might save him a dance. Out of the way, Effie, a voice hissed from behind her. George the footman nudged at her back, and Effie realized that she had paused in the middle of the narrow confines of the servants' passageways, listening to the party above. Effie hurried forward, flushed with embarrassment. I'm so sorry, she mumbled. I'm so tired, George, I've lost my mind a bit. Haven't we all? George grumbled behind her. Effie opened the door to the kitchens and entered, stepping aside for him. George coughed harshly into his hand as he passed, and Effie frowned at him. That's quite a cough, she said. Are you all right? Fine, George assured her. Just tired. He nudged Effie further into the kitchen with his elbow. Don't lose focus, Effie. This ball's a nightmare. Let's just get through it. Effie sighed heavily, and turned back toward the kitchen. The estate's head cook, more affectionately known as Cookie, was in the process of plating some cucumber sandwiches. Effie saw the punch trays off to one side, and she grabbed one quickly. "I'll just take this one up," she called to the poor, beleaguered cook. Cookie barely nodded at her, but it was enough to signal her agreement. Effie hurried back out of the kitchen and up to the ballroom. The guests had begun to filter inside. One of the ladies had sit down at the grand piano, idling her way through a playful tune. Effie headed out among the guests with the tray of punch, keeping her eyes carefully upon her feet. The very last thing she needed was to trip over herself in her tiredness and spill the punch all over some important lady. "Oh, I'll take one of those, please." A blonde woman in a blue gown reached out to pluck a glass from the tray. Her hair was done up with a golden chain, and her cheeks were tinted faintly pink with rouge. "I think I will as well." Benedict spoke from Effie's other side, and she nearly tripped on her own feet in spite of her careful attention. Benedict took a glass from the tray, and Effie glanced up at him. He was dressed just as finely as the other guests, in a fine golden waistcoat and a black jacket. There was such a warm smile on his handsome face that Effie froze on the spot, staring at him. Her heart sped up in her chest. For just an instant, Effie found herself caught between daydreams and reality, as his eyes glanced toward her. An irrational conviction overtook her. Benedict had recognized her. Was he going to ask her to dance, right here and now? "Dun-thum." Benedict called then, in a cheerful voice. His eyes had fixed upon someone just past Effie's shoulder. "How many years has it been now?" He swept past her with a laugh, and Effie felt her heart plummet all the way down into her feet. "And what was I expecting?" she thought wearily. "I have a tray this time. That makes me as good as invisible, doesn't it?" Effie was used to being overlooked as a servant. In fact, being overlooked was considered a crucial skill for someone of her status. Noblemen generally preferred their servants to seem as non-existent as possible. But somehow, the experience of being overlooked by this particular gentleman stung her unexpectedly. If only Benedict had never spoken to her so charmingly, Effie thought, she would not have gotten above herself so foolishly. An awful, jaded disappointment mixed with her fatigue, the feeling rose from her stomach all the way into her throat, knotting there like a stone. Hot tears pricked at the corner of Effie's eyes, and she backpedaled toward the wall with horror. "Oh, Lydia," she gasped. "Can you take the tray, please?" Lydia slumped her shoulders. "You've only just come up with it, Effie," she whispered plaintively. "Can't you hand out drinks just a bit longer?" "I am about to cry," Effie informed Lydia, with as level a tone as she could manage. "I need a bit of air, or else I doubt I'll stop." Lydia took the tray from her with a knowing sigh. "Oh dear," she said. "Well, go and get it over with. I may need to go have a cry myself, by the time this evening is up." Effie swept past Lydia for the side door, down into the servants' passages. As she did, her tears spilled over, and she found herself weeping with anger and shame. Crying fits had become somewhat more common among the staff these days, but Effie still had no desire to be caught sobbing in one of the cramped passageways below stairs. She sought her way outdoors, therefore, just outside of the large hedge maze that curled its way behind the manor. Normally, the hedge maze would have been a source of amusement for at least some of the guests, but the mud and snow had rendered it far less pleasing tonight. As a result, Effie had the bench outside of the maze nearly to herself. She settled herself down onto it, wiping at her face and rubbing at her arms. The cold, brisk air tempered her misery, and she took a few deep, steadying breaths. The faint strains of the grand piano trickled down towards her from the windows above. The dancing had begun, Effie thought. All of those lovely ladies in their lovely gowns would find themselves invited onto the dance floor by some handsome gentleman. Benedict was probably asking some woman to dance even now. That hardly matters, does it? Effie mumbled to herself. Why should it matter what he's doing? Certainly, no one was ever going to ask me to dance. She blinked a few times and forced out a laugh. Ha! The very thought. Oh dear. A soft, curious voice came from Effie's right-hand side, and she froze in place. Is that such a strange thought? But now I am even more compelled to ask than I was before. Would you like to dance, miss?" Effie stumbled to her feet. She turned to look at the man who had spoken, and found herself even more confused than before. He was a tall, lithe man, dressed in a fine, black velvet jacket. His hair was every bit as black as his jacket, and faintly tousled at the ends. His eyes were a shocking emerald green, like budding leaves in the springtime. They glowed faintly from within, in a way which made him stand out in the moonlight. He was not wearing a cravat, Effie thought, but there was a blossoming rose at his neck which served the purpose. I'm so sorry, sir," Effie managed. "I'd never have come out here if I thought I'd disturbed someone." "Oh, but I am not disturbed at all," the man said earnestly. He smiled at Effie, and her aching heart gave a twinge as she thought how handsome it made him appear, even in the semi-darkness. "I am so very pleased to meet you, in fact. How exciting this all is." Effie swallowed, clasping her hands in front of her. There was something very odd about the way the man spoke to her, but she'd yet to put her finger on just what it was. "Sir," she said slowly. "You are aware that I'm a maid here?" She had no wish to repeat her disappointing interaction with Benedict from the previous day. "Are you?" the man asked. He looked her over, and his eyes lit up. "My goodness, you are." He seemed somehow even more enthused by the revelation. "How delightfully perfect. Please, would you tell me your name?" Effie blinked. She could not remember the last time that a nobleman had asked her name. My name is Euphemia, my lord," she said. "But most people call me Effie." "What a lovely name." The nobleman beamed at her with such excitement that Effie found herself wondering whether he had ever been displeased by anything in his life. "Well," he said. "I am Lord Blackthorn. And I should ask you again, would you like to dance, Miss Euphemia?" He offered out his hand at this, and Effie realized that he truly meant for her to take it. That is not a good idea, Effie thought. Beyond the fact that she should not be dancing with guests, some part of her had noted that Lord Blackthorn was an uncomfortably strange man, and besides which, Effie had never heard of any land called Blackthorn. But Effie's body had run away ahead of her thoughts, and she found that she had already taken his hand. Lord Blackthorn's fingers were very long and fine, and he somehow carried with him the scent of fresh roses, even in the middle of February. "I believe I know this dance," Lord Blackthorn said with pleasure. "Why, Lady Hollowvale must have taught it to me only last week." He took Effie by the waist, even as she struggled to sort out whether she had heard of somewhere called Hollowvale or not. Lord Blackthorn twirled Effie about, and she stumbled clumsily over her shoes with a soft gasp. "Now, Miss Euphemia," he said fondly, as though she hadn't just fumbled her very first steps. "I must ask you a very important question. Would you say that you are powerless?" What?" Effie asked dazedly. She stumbled again, now utterly frantic to keep up, but Lord Blackthorn hardly seemed to notice her difficulties. Something about that question seems like it ought to be improper, Effie thought. But she couldn't pinpoint exactly what about the question was improper, and so she said, "I'm sure I don't know what you mean, Lord." "Well," Lord Blackthorn said thoughtfully. "Given the choice, would you say that you are powerful or would you say that you are powerless?" He spun her about again, and Effie began to feel dizzy. "I don't think this is how the dance goes at all," she thought. Effie's mind caught up to his words, and her temper surged. "Beggin' your pardon," she said crossly. "But I'm quite powerful enough to step on your toes if you decide to take liberties, sir." Lord Blackthorn tilted his head at Effie, apparently befuddled. As he did, she saw that his ears were gently pointed at the ends. Effie's heart leapt into her throat with sudden terror. An elf, she thought frantically. "Oh, Lord save me, I'm dancing with an elf." "Have I insulted you, Miss Euphemia?" Lord Blackthorn asked. "Oh, that wasn't my intention at all. You see, I have been investigating English virtue of late. I thought that it was all to do with fine boots and expensive jackets, quite tedious, I think you'll agree, but Lady Hollowvale informed me that it was really to do with being cruel to the powerful and kind to the powerless. And so I have been searching all over for one or the other, so that I might test the concept." Effie widened her eyes. I'm not powerful at all, sir, she hastened to assure him. Quite powerless, me. Lord Blackthorn laughed with pleasure. How fortuitous, he said. I wondered how long I might need to search, but here you are. In my very backyard, as it were. He spun Effie about, but she couldn't bring herself to take his hand again. Instead, she tumbled into the mud, whimpering with fear. Cold, wet muck coated Effie's hands and soaked through the knees of her skirt. Under other circumstances, she would have been horrified, knowing that it meant extra laundry. But the terror of her current situation far outweighed even that of an extra, dreaded laundry day. Effie's mother had told her many cautionary tales about the fair folk. Almost every one of those stories ended quite terribly for the hapless baker or shoemaker or milkmaid who happened to meet a fairy. Lord Blackthorn laughed as though Effie had intentionally flung herself into the mud as some sort of joke. He offered out his hand, but she simply stared up at him from the muddy ground. At her continued silence, he reached down to haul her up by the arms with an unnerving sort of strength, setting her back onto her feet and brushing delicately at the mud on her dress. This, of course, did little to clean the fabric. Oh, excellent. Lord Blackthorn observed. You have stained your dress. Surely, this is a terrible inconvenience. Would you like my help to clean it? Effie pressed her lips together helplessly. People in fairy tales get most into trouble when they say the wrong thing, she thought. Perhaps I can just say nothing at all, and he will leave. Lord Blackthorn blinked his 2 green eyes. Have you hurt yourself as well? He asked. I fear I cannot heal you. Such power is beyond me. But, he pounded one gloved fist into his hand in sudden inspiration. I could remove whichever limb concerns you and replace it with a new one. Effie widened her eyes in abject horror. No, she cried out, before she could stop herself. No, 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 that's too generous. Please don't even think of it. Lord Blackthorn blinked at this. Oh, he said. But it isn't generous at all. I would have to ask for some kind of payment in return, no matter how much I might wish it otherwise. I fear that is simply how fairies must do things. Effie forced a shaky smile at this, kneading her fingers into her palms. I'm quite poor, she said. Couldn't pay you even if I wanted to, your lordship. I'm afraid you'll just have to find someone else to help. Lord Blackthorn frowned thoughtfully. I do not require money, he said. I could take your happiest memory, perhaps, or else some small part of your name. Really, you would barely miss a syllable or two. Lord, Effie prayed silently. Just let me be safely rid of this fairy, and I'll tithe extra to the collection plate this Sunday. That's so nice of you, she said, very slowly. But I prefer to solve my own problems. My mum always told me it builds character. Lord Blackthorn looked so deeply crestfallen at this that Effie almost felt bad for him. I was so sure that this would work out perfectly, he sighed. I was convinced that you had some awful problem that I might solve. But, his eyes turned curious. What were you crying about, Miss Euphemia, if I might ask? Effie swallowed. She was sure that nothing good could come of telling a fairy about her troubles. But those strange green eyes fixed upon her, and the words rose up into her throat, spilling free without her permission. I fell in love with someone, Effie said hoarsely. It was awful stupid of me. And I was reminded tonight that he can't ever love me back. Effie cursed her mouth for running ahead without her. I didn't mean to say any of that. She thought. Has he done something magical to me already? Lord Blackthorn sighed. How terrible, he said. But he said it in such a way that she wasn't sure if he was pleased or sympathetic. But why can he not love you back, Miss Euphemia? You seem like a perfectly lovely human being. You have a full soul of your very own, and all of your original fingers. Once again, Effie tried to keep her silence, but Lord Blackthorn had lingered oddly on the syllables of her name, and the sound of that name tugged at Effie's very soul, forcing a brand new answer from her lips. He's the son of a baron, your lordship, Effie blurted out. And I'm just a maid. No baron's son will ever marry a maid. It's just not done. Lord Blackthorn looked terribly perplexed by this, so Effie added, it'd be like you givin' me a favor without me payin' you. This addition brought the light of understanding into the fairy's eyes, and he nodded sagely. I see, Lord Blackthorn said. Ah, what a problem. What a remarkable problem. He smiled brightly. Precisely the sort of problem which requires the most remarkable help. I don't think there's any help to be had there, Effie said warily. Really, it's fine. I'm feelin' better about it already, your lordship. Lord Blackthorn shook his head at her. But the matter is simple, he said. Tell me, Miss Euphemia, who would a baron's son normally marry? Again, Effie felt the overwhelming need to reply. She pressed her lips together, fiercely concentrating to prevent herself from responding, but the words burst out of her all the same. He'd marry someone like him, your lordship, she said, in a breathless rush. Maybe a baron's daughter, or, oh, bother. It was her name, Effie realized miserably. She had given the drat fairy her name, before recognizing him for what he was. Dimly, Effie seemed to remember that fairies could do terrible things with one's name. I only gave him my first name, didn't I? Effie thought, with a rising dread. Oh, I don't remember now. Lord Blackthorn smiled at her response. What a relief, he said. Well, that is no trouble at all, Miss Euphemia. I can simply turn you into a baron's daughter, and you shall marry the man you love. Effie shut her mouth abruptly, with a loud clack of teeth. For just a moment, all of her fear, all of her wet, muddy misery, evaporated at the touch of that unexpected suggestion. You could do that? Effie whispered. This time, she knew, it was not the mention of her name which made her speak. Oh, I could indeed, Lord Blackthorn said. His eagerness was painfully apparent, now that he had found something that truly seemed to pique her interest. He reached out to take her hand, patting it fondly. I could make you any sort of English noblewoman you liked, for all of those purposes which matter to your situation, I mean to say. Why, I could do it right now. Would you like to go to that very ball behind us and dance? Effie's mouth went dry. Her throat nearly closed up again with tears. She jerked her hand back from the fairy, pressing it desperately to her chest. Just minutes earlier, Effie had stood in the passages beneath that ballroom, dreaming that exact, impossible dream. All of those visions now came rushing back to her in an instant, brighter and more alluring than ever before. But this time, the dream was close enough to touch. All she would have to do is say yes, and she could walk into Hartfield as an equal, rather than as a servant. Yes. Yes, please. The words were on her tongue. But Effie noticed the surge of wobbly emotion that came with them just in time, and she closed her eyes fiercely. If wishes were horses, she recited softly, beggars would ride. If turnips were bayonets, I would wear one by my side. Effie opened her eyes and found Lord Blackthorn watching her with a puzzled expression. He was still close enough that the scent of fresh roses came to her with every breath. I don't understand, Miss Euphemia, he said. Are you making a wish? No, Effie said softly. I'm reminding myself that it's no good to wish. She wrapped her arms around herself. I fear I must go back inside, your lordship. I'm supposed to be workin' at that ball. If I linger here too long, then other people will have to do my work, and that's not fair. Lord Blackthorn knitted his brow in obvious consternation. I see, he sighed. Helping the powerless is much more difficult than I had first imagined. I should not wonder that English virtue is so rare, I suppose. He smiled gently at Effie, as though he had understood something very different than she had meant to say. It's no matter. I shall not give up right from the beginning, Miss Euphemia. Since you have been kind enough to give me your name, I shall give you mine in return. My true name is Juniper Jubilee. If you should ever need the slightest thing, anything at all, then all you need do is say that name 3 times, and I shall be back to help you at once. Effie couldn't help but blink at this. Juniper Jubilee, she repeated, before she could stop herself. What a strange name. Lord Blackthorn, or rather, Effie thought, Mr. Jubilee, merely beamed at her as though she had given him a compliment. Why thank you, Miss Euphemia, he said. I chose the name myself. I am still quite fond of it. Effie shook her head slowly. Well. Mr. Jubilee, she managed. You really don't mind that I have to go back and work? You won't be offended, I mean to say? Lord Blackthorn smiled again. How should I be offended, he asked. You have given me your valuable time and conversation, Miss Euphemia. And you were even kind enough to dance with me. Effie shrank beneath his unearthly green eyes. If any human being had addressed her in this way, she might have been flattered. But there was something about those eyes that reminded her just how dangerous every word of this conversation could be. She glanced uncomfortably toward the ground. I'll be goin' then, your lordship, Effie said. But when she looked up again, the elf was already gone. Chapter 2. If not for the mud still on her skirts, Effie might have convinced herself that her entire encounter with Lord Blackthorn had been some sort of daydream. In truth, she still wondered whether she had hit her head or started hallucinating from weariness, but she had no chance to remark upon the meeting to Lydia either way. The moment that Effie returned back indoors, she was forced to borrow a spare dress from one of the other maids so that she could rush back into the ball to wait on the guests. The rest of the evening was so breathlessly long and tiring that none of them had the time to speak of much other than punch glasses and courses for supper and the need to find room at the table for someone's inconvenient extra cousin. By the time Effie finally fell into bed, all thoughts of strange elves had utterly fled her mind. She woke up only a few hours later, as Lydia moaned about the fireplaces. Even the morning after a ball, there was always the fireplaces. She's goin' to kill us, Lydia mumbled, as they both lurched their way back upstairs to light the hearths. Lady Culver, I mean. This can't go on forever, Effie. Let's not waste breath complainin', Effie begged. I'm so tired today, I don't think I have the energy for it. Today, at least, the servants below stairs had the chance to settle down to breakfast, as the family was all abed sleeping in. But even breakfast came with its own miserable, extra surprise. Lady Panavar made mention of her French maid about a dozen times last night, Mrs. Sedgwick informed the staff tiredly. Lady Culver ended the night in a fury. She has insisted that I should find her some French maids at once. Lydia's mouth dropped open. What? She laughed. Just like that? And at her wages? Aren't French maids rather dear? It was a sign of how very exhausted they all were that Mrs. Sedgwick did not upbraid Lydia for her impertinence. The housekeeper normally insisted that the staff show strict respect for the family, even when outside of earshot. Obviously, there are no French maids to be had in the area, and her ladyship hasn't the budget to import one, like Lady Panavar, Mrs. Sedgwick sighed. And so, to sum the matter up, you shall all need to become French maids. Effie blinked slowly. Mrs. Sedgwick, she said carefully. I don't mean to be pert, but what does that mean, exactly? Mrs. Sedgwick shot Effie a tight smile. It means that you shall need new French names, she said, at least when you are above stairs. And you will need to practice a French accent. George spoke up, with a slight cough. Not the footmen, too? No, Mrs. Sedgwick said long-sufferingly. Lady Panavar does not have any French footmen, as far as I know, and so Lady Culver does not require any French footmen herself. You may remain English for the moment, George. Not, Mr. Allen added sharply, that either Lady Culver or Mrs. Sedgwick has any say in the matter of footmen, George. The esteemed butler stood off to one side, waiting patiently for Mrs. Sedgwick to finish her announcement so that the upper servants might retire to a different room for their breakfast. His coat was somehow immaculate, in spite of the long evening they'd all had, and his steel-gray mustache was neatly trimmed. Truly, Effie thought, Mr. Allen was every bit the marvelous professional that he had been made out to be upon his arrival at Hartfield. Mrs. Sedgwick glared openly at Mr. Allen, but she did not contradict him for the moment. I suppose you shall be Marie, Lydia. And Effie, let us say you are now Giselle. Effie took in a very deep breath at this. Somehow, the casual name change felt even more offensive than the entirety of yesterday's miserable ball. And just like that, she thought blearily, I am suddenly not even allowed to be myself. George must have caught the look in Effie's eyes, for he made a sympathetic face. Lady Culver still calls me James, he offered. I think he was the last footman. We never had a James, Lydia observed glumly. It's just what Lady Culver prefers to call footmen. She doesn't actually know any of our names. I doubt she'll remember the new French names either. Nevertheless, Mrs. Sedgwick interjected sharply. I shall need you to practice your French accent. Do not forget. I will be testing all of the maids at the end of the week. Groans went up along the table. Mrs. Sedgwick did not even bother to upbraid the girls. Instead, she turned toward Mr. Allen with a deep scowl, and stormed back through the door to retreat to her own breakfast. Practice a French accent, Lydia mumbled at her plate, in a disbelieving tone. Do you know what a French accent sounds like, Effie? I think I've heard Lady Culver say a few French words, once or twice, Effie muttered back. You got tendre from her, didn't you? Lydia narrowed her eyes. One of the officers at the ball started yelling in French when he spilled his punch, she said darkly. Maybe I'll practice some of those words. Effie didn't reply to this. She knew that Lydia was merely venting her frustrations. None of them would really dare to curse in front of Lady Culver, no matter how upset they were. As she glanced away uncomfortably, however, her eyes came to rest on a tall, prim figure standing near the door to the servants' hall. Effie froze in horror. Lord Blackthorn currently watched the gathered servants with a marvelously curious expression on his face. Effie had no idea just when the fairy had appeared, but while he stood out like a sore thumb among the servants, with his fine velvet jacket and his bright green eyes, no one else in the room seemed to pay him any mind at all. Lydia? Effie whispered tremulously. Do you see that man near the door? Lydia turned her head and pursed her lips. Oh yes, him, she said, as though there were nothing unusual about the elf's presence whatsoever. What about him, Effie? Effie blinked very quickly, trying to square the ridiculousness of the situation with her own expectations. Well, isn't he odd? Effie insisted. Look at him again, Lydia. He has a rose wrapped around his throat. Lydia knitted her brow. For just a moment, concern flickered across her features, but it soon smoothed away again into a dazed distraction. So he does, she said. Isn't that something? Lydia turned back to her food then, and seemed promptly to forget the entire conversation. Miss Euphemia. Lord Blackthorn had caught Effie looking his way, and now, he headed over toward her, with his usual delighted gait. His bright green eyes sparkled with cheer. What a lovely morning it is outside. It is very sunny out, you know. He paused, then frowned thoughtfully. Oh dear. I keep forgetting that English conversation is not always about the weather. Shall we talk of dolphins instead? Effie glanced around herself helplessly, searching for anyone who might come to her aid. But, just like Lydia, all of the other servants had entirely lost interest in the elf in front of them. Effie turned back toward Lord Blackthorn with a helpless, terrified sinking in her stomach. I thought you'd left, your lordship, Effie offered tremulously. She wasn't at all sure how to answer his question about dolphins, and so she swept right past it. But why should I leave, Miss Euphemia? Lord Blackthorn asked Effie. He sounded utterly bewildered now. Surely, you cannot think that I would abandon you while you are in distress. That would not be very virtuous of me at all. Effie's stomach dropped all the way to her feet. As exhausted as she had been this morning, she had managed to forget all about her encounter with the elf. And wasn't that arrogant of her? Effie had somehow convinced herself that she had cleverly avoided the fairy's attention forever, unlike those other foolish women in her mother's fairy tales. That is, so thoughtful of you, my lord, Effie said desperately. But really, I insist. You're an important, elf, obviously. I can't be talking you from your duties like this. Lord Blackthorn pressed one gloved hand to his chest. How noble you are, he cried. How humble. Why, you only make me more certain of my choice by the second, Miss Euphemia. Truly, you deserve so much better than your current circumstances. Effie sank down into her chair, pressing her face into her hands. But what is the matter? Lord Blackthorn asked her. Now you are upset again. Is it about the French, Miss Euphemia? I could teach you French in a moment, you know. I would be only too happy to do so. And no, Effie whimpered. That's all right, your lordship. I really ought to learn the French on my own. You are very tired looking, Lord Blackthorn mused. Has your sleep been restless? I could help you fall asleep, for certain. How long do you think would be best? I think at least a year is traditional. Effie sprang up from her chair. I have chores I really ought to get to, she blurted out. Lots of sweepin' to do, after that big ball. Lord Blackthorn blinked at her. But you have not yet finished your breakfast, Miss Euphemia, he pointed out. Effie blanched. I'm not hungry, she lied. Her poor stomach gurgled plaintively, and she promised to herself to sneak down to the kitchens for a snack, once she was safely free of the elf. Why don't you have it, she added, on inspiration. Surely, fairies also ate food, didn't they? Perhaps if Lord Blackthorn sat down to eat, he would stay out of Effie's hair for at least a few minutes. Lord Blackthorn rubbed thoughtfully at his chin. Are you sure, he asked her. You really wish to give me your breakfast, Miss Euphemia? There was an odd undertone to his voice as he asked the question, but Effie simply didn't have the energy to parse it. Yes, she sighed. Yes, I'm sure. Please have a seat, your lordship. She gestured obligingly toward her empty chair. To Effie's great relief, Lord Blackthorn sat down in her place, still looking thoughtful. How generous, he murmured. Is this what all English maids are like? Lydia turned to look at him. Well, hello, she said. Where'd you come from, monsieur? Effie winced at Lydia's half-hearted attempt at a French accent. Oh, we are never going to be believable, she thought. I come from Blackthorn, of course, the elf replied cheerfully. And what is your name, young lady? Effie widened her eyes at the question. She snatched at Lydia's arm, hauling her up bodily from her seat before she could respond. I'll need your help, Lydia, she gasped. With all of the sweepin'. Lydia's mouth dropped open. What? She asked incredulously. But, my breakfast. We've already had enough to eat, Effie hissed to her. You ought to give his lordship your breakfast too, Lydia. He's very distinguished company, after all. Lydia narrowed her eyes, but Effie pinched her side, and she yelped. Oh, all right. Lydia huffed. Take my breakfast too, why don't you? Lord Blackthorn stared at them both, looking suddenly overwhelmed. Must I? He asked. Well, I suppose I must, if you insist. Effie forced a smile his way, even as she began to drag Lydia toward the door. Do take your time, she said. As soon as they had cleared the door and hurried out into the hallway, Lydia pried her arm free of Effie's grip. What is the matter with you, Effie? The other maid demanded. I only got a few bites, and I know you did the same. Did you not see anything odd about that man you were just talking to? Effie asked in despair. His ears are pointed, Lydia. His eyes are strange. I told you before that he was wearing a rose around his neck, and it barely seemed to faze you. Lydia knitted her brow again. This time, however, Effie's words seemed to penetrate somewhat. I feel like I would have noticed something like that, Lydia said dubiously. But she suddenly seemed less certain of herself than she had been before. He did come out of nowhere, didn't he? And I realize now that I don't even know his name. He's an elf. Effie moaned. I talked to him last night, Lydia. I'm such a fool, I thought he'd gone for good, but he's clearly still here. Whatever you do, you mustn't give him your name or make any deals with him. Lydia pressed her fingers to her forehead. But are you sure? She mumbled. Do elves really wander into the servants' hall and eat people's breakfasts? That seems like such a funny thing to happen. Well, hopefully he will take at least a little bit to eat our breakfasts, Effie breathed. I'm not even sure what to do, Lydia. Do we go and tell Mrs. Sedgwick? Or maybe Mr. Allen, he's from the city, isn't he? Surely, he ought to know something about dealin' with fairies. Lydia shot Effie a skeptical look. I don't know that even Mr. Allen will have dealt with fairies before, she said. But you're right, we really ought to say something. Effie started heading down the hallway toward Mrs. Sedgwick's quarters, where she knew the upper servants would be taking their breakfast. Lydia followed after her, though the other maid dragged her feet reluctantly as they went. Neither of them particularly wanted to knock at Mrs. Sedgwick's door. But Effie knew that it was her trouble at issue, and so she forced herself to rap her knuckles there very loudly. Mrs. Sedgwick's wooden soles clip-clopped toward the door. Presently, the housekeeper opened the door, looking tired and peeved. This had better be an emergency, or else oh. Effie. Mrs. Sedgwick's combative tone softened somewhat. Is something the matter? Effie stared at the housekeeper for a moment, speechless. It had seemed only natural to tell the housekeeper about the fairy in their midst, but now that Effie was standing before her, she wasn't sure just how to phrase the problem. I cannot just say, there is a fairy in the servants' hall eating my breakfast, she thought in a panic. Unfortunately, Effie's tired mind had run away with her, and so she did indeed say, there's a fairy in the servants' hall eatin' my breakfast, Mrs. Sedgwick. Mrs. Sedgwick blinked. Somewhere behind her, Effie heard the clatter of plates, as the rest of the upper servants ate their food. Effie, Mrs. Sedgwick said slowly. I do not know what on earth has gotten into you. You normally have such a steady head on your shoulders. Surely, you haven't let one of the other servants bait you into a silly dare? Mrs. Sedgwick glanced suspiciously at Lydia, who normally would have done something of the sort. And no, Mrs. Sedgwick. Effie said desperately. Oh, I've said it all wrong. But I really mean it, Mrs. Sedgwick, there is a fairy, and he's goin' to cause all sorts of trouble. We are all very tired, Effie. Mrs. Sedgwick snapped. This time, there was a hint of ice in her voice. I have neither the time nor the energy to deal with this silliness. Now, I do not want to hear another word on the subject, do you understand me? Effie stared at her helplessly. She turned to look at Lydia pleadingly. There is a fairy, Mrs. Sedgwick, Lydia said, though Effie knew that she still didn't entirely believe the words. He asked me my name, and everything. I said not another word. Mrs. Sedgwick snapped. Not from either of you. And if you persist in this foolish prank, girls, then I will have you in the scullery every day for the next week, so help me. Mrs. Sedgwick did not give them a chance to respond this time. Rather, she slammed the door shut with a dread sense of finality that made Effie weak in the knees. I guess we should have expected that, Lydia sighed. She turned toward Effie. You don't think we might ignore the fairy and he'll just go away? Effie shook her head mournfully. I thought he'd gone last night, she said. But then he showed up this morning, and now nothing I say can convince him to leave. Well, Lydia wrinkled up her nose. Maybe he's a helpful fairy? He could be one of those ones that mends shoes or spins thread. Effie shook her head despairingly. No, not at all, she said. He's a lord, Lydia. They're always the worst of the bunch, castin' curses on people and trickin' them out of their souls. Lydia grimaced. Normal lords is bad enough, she muttered. Fairy lords must be something else entirely. She pursed her lips. But who else are we supposed to tell? I'm fair certain Mrs. Sedgwick would have us whipped if we tried to spin a story for Lady Culver. Effie rubbed at her face. Mrs. Sedgwick was right about one thing, they were all far too tired to be dealing with fairies right now. I don't know, she admitted. Oh, this is awful. I guess I might write to my mum. She does know all of those fairy tales, so maybe she'll know how to keep him out. Lydia nodded. Yes, ask your mum, she said. I'll talk to Cookie, too. She once told me all of the herbs to use for a love spell, so she might have a plant to set a fairy straight. Lydia frowned worriedly. We really do have to get to chores though, Effie, or we won't be workin' here much longer either way. Effie wilted on her feet at the very thought. Why must all of this be happenin' at once, she murmured to herself. Surely, I didn't do something terrible enough to deserve this? What was that? Lydia asked her, halfway through a yawn. Effie flinched. Nothing, she sighed. I was mutterin' nursery rhymes again. You do that at the oddest times, Lydia mumbled. They walked themselves wearily up the stairs toward the green baize door, searching out the brooms as they went. But when they came out into the house's front entryway, there was not a single mote of dust to be found. In fact, it was already perfectly clean. Oh no, Effie said. Oh, thank God. Lydia said. The entryway ought to have been full of mud and dust from all of those guests trudging in and out of the weather in their booted feet. Effie had noted the awful mess as she'd passed it that morning to tend to the fireplaces. But the front entryway currently looked as clean as the day it had first been built. All of the floorboards had been scrubbed spick and span. Someone had even cast a brand new layer of sand over it all, to finish it off. All of the other surfaces in the entryway had been carefully dusted, the lamp wicks were neatly trimmed, the curtains had been beaten. This is a disaster, Effie groaned. But how did he do it, Lydia? We never made a deal with him. I certainly never promised him anything. Lydia shook her head with a broad, creeping smile on her face. Oh, what's it matter, Effie? She asked. It's done. All that awful mess from the ball, just magicked away. Lydia's eyes widened, and she hurried toward the ballroom. There, she threw open the doors and laughed with utter delight. Look, Effie. The ballroom's clean, too. We might even have time for a nap, if everything is this way. You're not listening. Effie told Lydia. She glanced past the other maid into the ballroom, and her heart sank even further toward her knees. The mirrors had all been cleaned and stashed away somewhere else. It all looked just as it had before they'd set up for the ball at all. There's goin' to be a price, Lydia, Effie said. And what will a fairy make us pay, for all of this? I don't care, not one whit. Lydia declared. I'm goin' back to bed, Effie. I feel like I could fall asleep on my feet. Effie knew she ought to go after Lydia, as the other maid danced away with her broom in her arms. But she found herself stuck staring into the empty ballroom instead, frozen with an unspeakable dread. Chapter 3. There was little recourse. Effie could no more undo the cleaning than she could unmeet the elf that had happened upon her. Rather than dwell upon the matter, she went down to the kitchen to beg for some food, and then, with absolute resignation, she took her muddied dress to the scullery to wash it clean. Thankfully, as it was just one dress and one chemise, Effie had only to fetch and boil enough water for one tub. But since the dress was one of Lady Culver's old things, it had some old lace at the neckline. This meant that Effie had to unpick the lace and remove it from the collar before she dared to scrub it with lye soap. The scullery maid, Alice, complained incessantly about the smell as Effie worked, but Effie knew that she was secretly glad of the company. Just as Effie finished wringing out as much water as she could from the damp gown, Mrs. Sedgwick came clip-clopping down the short stairs of the scullery. Effie, the housekeeper said sharply. There is company. Lady Culver will need you to wait upon her and some guests for tea. Effie blinked. She had nearly protested that her best dress was still in pieces, but after Mrs. Sedgwick's stern lecture that morning, Effie suspected that this would only gain her another reprimand. Might I bring this up with me to sew it back together? She asked instead, carefully. Mrs. Sedgwick had already turned her back to leave the scullery. It was clear that her morning had gotten busier. Yes, fine. Mrs. Sedgwick said. So long as you keep your eye on the tea. And remember, you are Giselle from now on. I have told Lady Culver, and she has approved the name, so you must not forget. Effie covered a wince. Yes, Mrs. Sedgwick, she said, as she gathered up her damp gown. That is, oui, Mrs. Sedgwick, the housekeeper corrected Effie, in a stilted accent that did not sound French at all. Effie did not respond again, since she did not trust that she could say it correctly either. Lady Culver had decided to take tea in the blue room this morning. She had 3 different morning rooms at Hartfield, and so it was always necessary to specify. Effie stopped by the kitchen to make a fresh pot of tea, stacking it onto a tray along with the good silver, which Mr. Allen had already been kind enough to fetch. Lady Culver is visiting with her friend Miss Buckley, Mr. Allen informed Effie brusquely, as they both exited the kitchen. They are on very good terms, and so Lady Culver will desire everything to be at its best. I swear, I don't know how you keep track of it all, Mr. Allen. Effie marveled. I thought you'd be most concerned with Lord Culver's affairs. All of the family's well-being is my affair, Euphemia, Mr. Allen informed her, in a grave, professional tone. Only very foolish men in my position presume otherwise. Mrs. Sedgwick thinks that you are meddling in her position, though, Effie thought. Thankfully, Mr. Allen was already heading off in the opposite direction before the words could spill from her tired lips. Effie sighed, and hoisted the tea tray a bit higher. She dared to peer into the servants' hall on the way to the stairs, but it was utterly empty, and especially devoid of any fairies. For just a moment, Effie wondered if she'd imagined the entire morning. But there was no time to dwell upon it. Lady Culver was only just settling down into the blue room with her guest when Effie headed inside with the tea. The young, blonde woman in question did seem familiar, and Effie was sure that she'd seen Miss Buckley before, at least in passing. Had she been at the ball just the evening before, wearing a blue gown? As Effie passed the doorframe, however, she was jolted from her surreptitious study of the room by the realization that Benedict had stopped by to join the gathering. The youngest male Ashbrooke was clearly dressed for the outdoors, in a green wool coat and buckskin breeches. There was a dashing, breathless air to him. Somehow, Benedict's brown hair already looked wind-tossed, though Effie was sure that he had yet to step outside. We're just going out for a ride, Benedict was saying to Lady Culver. I hardly think you should change your plans for us. Besides, you know how roughly Thomas likes to ride. I'd worry that one of you ladies might take a fall. You are so thoughtful, Benedict, Lady Culver said. There was a sweetness to her tone that had not been there only the day before. We shall spare you the worry, then, but you must promise that you will join us for tea when you return. You only danced once with Miss Buckley last night, and I had so hoped to introduce you better. If Benedict was at all fazed by Lady Culver's sudden amiability, the emotion did not show in his smile. If you are still here when we return, then I certainly shall, he promised. Though please, do not wait too long on my account. Benedict nodded toward the other woman. Miss Buckley, he said, in a polite dismissal. And then, Benedict turned toward Effie. His warm brown eyes met hers. Benedict smiled in such a broad, friendly manner that Effie nearly looked to see if one of his brothers had come up the stairs behind her. But surely, she would have heard their heavy footfalls if that was the case. And goodbye to you too, Benedict added, with a hint of humor. Miss. I really must get your name, mustn't I? Effie's heart skipped a beat, she flushed deeply. She said eloquently. Her name is Francesca. Lady Culver informed Benedict, before Effie could answer for herself. There was an unmistakable irritation in the lady's tone now. She is French, Benedict. She probably has no idea what you are saying. Now, have mercy and leave her be. Effie dropped her mouth open before she could catch herself. Mostly, she realized, it was the pure indignity of it all. Lady Culver knew quite well that Benedict had said hello to Effie on his entrance to the house. All three of them were therefore aware that Effie was not a French maid. But Lady Culver was the matron of the household, and it would not do for Benedict to call her a liar, no matter how patently ridiculous the whole situation was. Benedict's smile turned rueful, and Effie was sure that he had angled himself so that Lady Culver could not see the shocked look on Effie's face. Of course, he said. She does have that refined French look about her, doesn't she? Benedict inclined his head toward Effie. Pardonnez-moi, mademoiselle. Benedict had a far better French accent than Lady Culver did. Effie did not trust herself to attempt a French reply. She nodded silently, sidestepping out of his way as he headed for the hallway. "Would you be quick with the tea, Francesca?" Lady Culver asked sharply. Effie quickened her steps, setting down the tray and arranging the table for them. "I'm quite sure I'm supposed to be Giselle," Effie thought. Lady Culver had clearly forgotten which silly French name Effie had been assigned, and had simply made up a new one on the spot. Francesca must be the least creative French name I have ever heard. Effie swallowed the words, along with her growing fury and misery. It would not do to get angry. Thankfully, Lady Culver was far more preoccupied with her guest than she was with her servant. The lady quickly forgot Effie's presence entirely, turning toward Miss Buckley as though Effie were invisible. "I know that I promised to make arrangements for you with Benedict," Lady Culver sighed, "but you see what I mean about him? He is simply ridiculous, even at the best of times. If I weren't here to keep him in line, I swear he would gossip with every maid in this household." Effie slunk over toward a chair near the wall, pulling the pieces of her dress from her side bag and searching out a needle and thread. Sewing the lace back onto wet material was hardly ideal, but Effie had waxed the thread, at least, and so she hoped that she might have the dress back in working order by the end of tea, if she was very deliberate about her stitching. "Oh, surely Mr. Benedict isn't as bad as all of that," Miss Buckley observed to Lady Culver cheerfully, as she picked up her teacup. "He has a sense of humor, is all." "I do not exaggerate, Mary." Lady Culver huffed. Not a second after Benedict entered this house for the first time, he was talking with another maid. Before he'd even said so much as hello to his own brother. Effie pricked at her thumb with the needle. She stifled the resulting gasp, something halfway between pain and fury. "She really doesn't remember who I am," Effie thought. Lady Culver had not even identified that Effie was the same maid who had been scrubbing her muddy entryway only 2 days prior. And now, the nerve, the lady was going to continue talking about Effie as though she were not sitting right there in the corner, forced to listen to every word. "Do not get angry," Effie reminded herself. She had to grit her teeth against the emotion that choked her throat, however. She could not recite English rhymes in front of Lady Culver's guest, if she were to be a French maid, but there was stitching in Effie's lap, at least, and so she focused herself upon it with renewed fervor. "Oh, I believe you," Miss Buckley laughed. "But what of it? Are you not taking this a bit far, Eleanor? I know you have always been very serious about etiquette, but men must be allowed some allowances. They are all bores to some extent or another." Lady Culver's tone darkened. "Well, this is quite serious, Mary," she replied. "I will not speculate further in polite company, but I am sure that you can guess at my suspicions. Benedict has such a reputation in London, after all." She paused. "Are you certain that you still wish me to arrange things between you?" "I will do it, of course. I would much prefer to have you as a sister. But I cannot help but wonder if you will be miserable with the man." Effie clenched her teeth, focusing ever more keenly upon the dress in her lap. She imagined her anger as part of the thread in her needle. With each careful motion, Effie imagined that anger leaving her body, stowing itself within the stitches of the dress, where it could not bother her any longer. "Oh, why should I worry either way?" Miss Buckley asked. "Mr. Benedict has a sizable portion to his name. He is young and charming, and if I marry him, I shall get to see you more often. I cannot imagine that a better prospect shall come along. I am quite content with the matter, even if he were the worst scoundrel in the world. It's not as though I must love him, is it?" Effie listened to all of this with a sense of weary misery. Her anger had drained away, now that she had soothed herself with a bit of sewing, but without it, she was merely tired again. What awful accident of birth had led her to this point, sitting in the corner of another woman's morning room, sewing another woman's damp hand-me-down dress together while better people discussed the man she loved in such an awful, mercenary manner? And what will I do about it? Effie wondered dully. There is nothing that I can do about it. I am a maid. The best that I shall ever be is a housekeeper, perhaps. At least I will be able to keep my own silk gown in good condition. Lady Culver and Miss Buckley chatted so long over tea that Effie had to refill the pot twice more. Their conversation ranged over a plethora of woeful topics, from the boredom of country life to the difficulty of finding good help. Effie numbed herself to it with her stitching, and at the very least, she had a whole dress by the end of the visit. Benedict did not return in time to say goodbye to Miss Buckley. Effie vaguely hoped that he was as smart as he seemed, and that he had spotted the trap for what it was. Once Miss Buckley had left, Lady Culver returned to the morning room to pick up a book from the side table. Her eyes caught on the dress in Effie's arms, and she frowned. "Is that my old dress?" Lady Culver asked archly. Effie took a careful breath. "Yes, Lady Culver," she said carefully. "You gave it to me at Christmas." Lady Culver narrowed her eyes. "That embroidery on it is new," she said. "The leaves and the flowers. Did you add those yourself?" Effie chewed at her lip. "Yes, Lady Culver," she said. "I enjoy embroidery." "Well, it is not proper," Lady Culver said. "You have improved the dress too much. People will mistake you for a lady." She tucked her book into her arms and turned away. "Hand that dress back to Mrs. Sedgwick. She will have to find you something less eye-catching to wear." Lady Culver turned around. Before Effie could even think of a response, she had disappeared through the doorway. Effie stared after her in silence. For once, her anger failed her. In its place was a cold, hollow spot in her chest. "There is nothing I can do," Effie thought again. But, no. There was something that she could do, wasn't there? Just that very morning, a noble elf had reminded Effie that he was very keen to be kind to the powerless. And oh, Effie was feeling very powerless right now. "That is a terrible idea," Effie whispered to herself. Mum would be horrified. But Effie's mother had also told her that fairies were nothing but dangerous trouble, and so far, no trouble had fallen down upon Effie's head, had it? The worst that the fairy had done was clean a few rooms. And he did seem so genuinely interested in helping her. Effie looked down at the dress in her arms. She had put months of idle work into the leaves and flowers that adorned it. It was, she thought, the one pretty thing that she owned. But because of who she was, because of how powerless she was, Lady Culver had decided to take it away from her in the space of a heartbeat. That isn't right, Effie thought suddenly. None of this is right. Do I really deserve all of this, simply because I was born in a village instead of in a manor? Juniper Jubilee. The name tumbled from Effie's lips in a scared little whisper. Juniper Jubilee. Juniper Jubilee. I hope you're still here. I'd like to talk to you, if you please. The scent of roses flickered through the morning room. There was something both sweeter and wilder about the smell than the bouquets that Effie sometimes handled in the summer. This, she thought, was the heavy scent of an entire winding briar of roses, woody thorns and all. Soon, she became fearfully aware of the tall man now standing behind her. Miss Euphemia. Lord Blackthorn greeted her, with that same ever-present delight in his voice. What a pleasure. Oh, I do hope my payment was sufficient. I will admit, I was not sure how to match the value of 2 breakfasts. I am sure that the food did not cost very much money, but since you were both so hungry, your breakfast must have been very dear to you indeed. Effie knitted her brow, turning upon the elf with confusion. He was smiling in his usual manner, but there was a hint of self-consciousness to the expression this time. I don't understand, Effie said slowly. Are you talking about the entryway and the ballroom? But I never asked you to clean anything for me. Lord Blackthorn sighed. Oh, mortals, he said, with a hint of fondness. You really do not know how things are done at all, do you? You gave me a gift, Miss Euphemia, but I cannot simply accept something for nothing. I am therefore obliged to remedy the shortfall. He smiled distantly at this. I have never had a mortal give me a gift before. What a lovely idea, giving something over without expecting anything else in return. I would love to try it for myself, but I am afraid it is beyond me. Effie's heart softened just a bit at that, though she knew she shouldn't allow it to do so. Well, as you said, your lordship. I wasn't expecting anything in return. You really shouldn't have gone to the trouble. Against her better judgment, Effie began to wonder whether all lords of Faerie were really so terrible. Surely, there had to be just one story about them that didn't end so awfully. And if there wasn't a story like that, then, well, perhaps hers could be the first. Oh, but I really must go to the trouble, Lord Blackthorn assured her. I know it is merely your kind, selfless soul that leads you to deny my help, Miss Euphemia, but it is incumbent upon me to return your gifts to you threefold. Other fairies might of course interpret this maliciously, but I have set myself in pursuit of English virtue, and I would never do such a thing. Effie hesitated at this. She turned herself to face him fully now. You're saying that, you want to be more virtuous, she hazarded. You're trying to be a better person, by helping others? Lord Blackthorn beamed at her. Yes, precisely, he said. Does that not sound entertaining, to become something that you were not before? What a challenge it is. I am enjoying every moment of it so far. Effie pasted on a nervous smile. The oddly worded sentiment did not terribly encourage her. But as Effie thought of what her life must be like otherwise, slinking downstairs to hand her dress over to Mrs. Sedgwick, and practicing abominable French in between more endless balls, she knew with dreadful certainty that she could not bring herself to do it. Anything, she thought, had to be better than that. If I were to ask for your help, Effie said carefully, what would that entail? Let's say I did want to marry Mr. Benedict. That would have to cost me something, wouldn't it? Lord Blackthorn's expression lit up, somehow, with even further pleasure. In fact, Effie thought, one might describe him as full of, yes, jubilation. Oh, how exciting, he breathed. Then you are asking for my help? How wonderful. You will not regret it, Miss Euphemia, I assure you. I already halfway regret it, Effie thought wearily. But I suppose I mustn't say that aloud either. But the cost, your lordship, she reminded him carefully. Oh yes, Lord Blackthorn said distractedly. I suppose we mustn't get ahead of ourselves. But I am sure that we can work out something reasonable. He had begun to pace thoughtfully now, rubbing at his chin. I cannot simply snap my fingers and have him marry you, of course, he must do the asking himself. But I am sure that it is within my skill to encourage one foolish mortal to fall in love. The elf paused, and then nodded to himself. I shall give you every bit of aid within my power, Miss Euphemia. You may be sure that I shall do everything I can to see it done. But there is one remaining problem. I suspect that you have little to offer me of equal worth. He straightened abruptly, and his green eyes flashed with inspiration. Aha! We shall make it a wager. A wager that you are sure to win, of course. Effie knitted her brow. What ought I to be wag-Aaron, exactly? She asked warily. Oh, it hardly matters, Lord Blackthorn said, with a careless wave of his hand. I shall be helping you to win the wager myself, after all. And isn't that clever? Why, it is almost like a gift that way. Something about the statement set Effie's teeth on edge, but she had come too far simply to shrink away from the idea now. But I still need to know just what it is that I'm agreeing to, she insisted gently. Lord Blackthorn nodded distractedly. Oh, let us say that you have 101 days to marry the man that you love, he said. We will see it done, of course. But if something should go awry, and I tell you, Miss Euphemia, it is vanishingly unlikely, then I suppose that you shall simply have to come back with me to Faerie and serve me as a maid instead, for the rest of your days. He laughed at this, as though he had just made a joke. Effie swallowed hard. And that's a fair wager, she asked. Doesn't it seem a bit lopsided? Lord Blackthorn frowned at that. Well, it does seem correct, he observed. You are asking to become something that you are not. If you fail, then I must somehow make you more of what you already are, mustn't I? Effie took a deep breath. She squared her shoulders. I would rather serve a fairy than serve Lady Culver, she said. Then that's the deal? You'll help me marry Mr. Benedict, or else I go back to Faerie with you? Well, not quite, Lord Blackthorn admitted. He looked sheepish now. I will have to see to an awful lot. You will not easily become a lady, Miss Euphemia. I will need to borrow someone else's elocution for you, and find you dresses, and, my goodness, you will need to learn to dance a bit better, since we would not want you ending up in the mud again. His bright green eyes glanced down toward the dress in Effie's arms for some reason, and he smiled to himself. But I know what I shall ask in return. For every minute that you are a lady, you shall add 1 stitch to my coat. I am sure that you can embroider something quite fetching upon it, if you set your mind to it. Effie blinked. You want me to embroider your coat, she repeated, uncertain that she had heard him correctly. The idea seemed terribly tame, compared to the threat of being dragged back to Faerie for the rest of her days. Most desperately, Lord Blackthorn assured her. What fine work you have done on this dress. I have never seen its like before, Miss Euphemia. I was never fond of Lord Holloway's far too many jackets, but a jacket with stitching such as that would truly make me the envy of every fairy I know. Why, it is still possible to be virtuous and fashionable, don't you think? Effie smiled nervously at that. She couldn't help but be at least a bit gratified by the compliment. If that's all, she said. Then I'll accept that deal, your lordship. Surely, Effie wouldn't need to be a lady for more than a few hours every other day. Balls did not happen all of the time, and she could not spend every day trying to catch Benedict's attention. At 101 days, at perhaps 100 stitches a night, that couldn't end up more than 10,000 stitches, all told. Lord Blackthorn smiled at her. But you have given me your name, Miss Euphemia, he said. It is only fair for you to use mine as well, especially since we have made a bargain. You should call me Jubilee, at the very least. Effie winced at the very idea. Perhaps we could split the difference, she offered, since I might well end up sweepin' your floors someday. I could call you Mr. Jubilee? Lord Blackthorn laughed, not because the idea was funny, Effie thought, but because he was so pleased to have secured his bargain. If you must, he said. The elf reached out to take Effie's hand then, with an exaggerated bow. He brushed his lips across the back of her skin, and she shivered involuntarily, for with that gesture, a strange and uncomfortable hook had settled deep into her soul. And now, between us, Lord Blackthorn declared, we shall surely make you the most desirable lady in all of England. He straightened with a broad smile. If you will kindly excuse me for a time, Miss Euphemia. I must go and borrow you a few things. Chapter 4. For the entire rest of the day, Effie did not see Lord Blackthorn again. Even as the hours went by, she became less and less certain that she had done the right thing by making the bargain. 101 days? It had seemed like so much more time when Lord Blackthorn had said it out loud. But really, Effie had barely 3 months to make Mr Benedict Ashbrooke fall in love with her and propose. Had Lord Blackthorn tricked her into accepting an impossible deal? But he had seemed so genuine on the point. I shall do everything I can to see it done, he had said. And Effie had truly believed that he was sincere. But then, why had he disappeared for a full day? Effie meant to unburden her woes to Lydia when she returned to their room that evening, but Lydia was already fast asleep, and the moment that her own head hit the pillow, she found herself asleep as well. When Effie woke up the next morning, the fireplaces, Lydia hissed again. They were immediately so busy that she could not get a word in edgewise. Today, at least, Effie managed a few decent meals, though she found herself constantly checking the doorway to the servants' hall, worried that she might see Lord Blackthorn's tall figure looming there. The fact that the elf did not appear for another full day only made her ever more nervous. Effie was further confounded when she returned to her room that evening and found Lydia perched precariously on top of a side table, hanging mistletoe above their doorway. What are you doing, Lydia? Effie asked, bewildered. Lydia gasped in surprise and nearly tumbled from the table entirely. Somehow, she managed to clamber down without turning an ankle. I talked to Cookie today, Lydia said breathlessly. She said mistletoe keeps away fairies, so I went out to find some. Effie flinched at the reminder. Oh, she sighed. Lydia, I've done something awful thick-headed. From there, Effie had little choice but to explain the situation. To her surprise, Lydia was more outraged by Lady Culver's demand about Effie's dress than she was about Effie's deal with Lord Blackthorn. Well, of course you'd ask for anyone's help after that business. Lydia said hotly. What an awful woman. She's got worse manners than our scullery maid, only no one ever notices 'cause she says it nicer. Can you imagine any one of us giving a gift and then snatching it back again? We'd get us a stern lecture about Christian values, you can be sure. I'm upset about the dress, of course. Effie said desperately. But Lydia, I've gone and made a bargain with an elf. Lydia crossed her arms uncomfortably. Well, I figure what's done is done, on that score, the other maid admitted. But we can put up more mistletoe, and maybe he won't come for you? If he can't get in to hold up his end, then the deal goes all wrong, doesn't it? Effie was just contemplating the wisdom of this particular approach when there was a polite knocking at her door. She opened the door a crack, and her heart sank. Lord Blackthorn was standing on the other side, with a paper-wrapped package in his arms. I have all sorts of ideas, the elf informed Effie cheerfully, as though there had been no pause at all between their conversation the previous morning and their conversation now. I do hope that you don't mind the lateness. I have been out all this time gathering the necessities, and it took me somewhat longer than expected. Lord Blackthorn strode through the doorway as though the mistletoe hanging above it was no impediment at all. Effie pressed her hand to her mouth. She said carefully. Apologies, Mr. Jubilee. But there's mistletoe above the door. Is that a problem for you? Lord Blackthorn turned to glance upward, with a bemused expression on his features. So there is, he said. I appreciate your concern, Miss Euphemia, but no, mistletoe is only overprotective when it comes to children, you see, and there are no children here. If I were trying to steal an English child, however, then I would certainly be in trouble. Effie glanced worriedly toward Lydia, but the other maid's face had once again gone distant and uninterested, and she had now settled herself upon her bed as though she were contemplating sleep. The household will be attending a ball tonight, Lord Blackthorn told Effie, as though Lydia were not even present. Lord Culver told me himself, on my way down to look for you. Isn't that convenient? We shall have to see that you are ready for it yourself. Of course they are, Effie responded dimly. It's why we don't have to make supper. Wait, you talked to Lord Culver? But didn't he see anything funny about some stranger walking around in his house? Lord Blackthorn chuckled. Humans do react in the strangest way when I go about normally, he admitted. But I have taken to wearing a small glamour so that they all find me horribly ordinary. It makes things so much simpler, don't you think? Effie glanced toward Lydia, who was now plumping her pillow and humming to herself. But I don't seem to be affected, she said. How does that work? Oh, you have never been affected, Lord Blackthorn said. I was very confused at first, but I think that it must have something to do with your marvelous stitching. Does it bother you? Shall I release the glamour for the moment? I should have thought to ask. Effie wanted to ask what on earth her stitching had to do with glamours, but she cast another sideways glance toward Lydia, and decided that it was far more important to answer the elf's question. I would appreciate that, Mr. Jubilee, Effie told him carefully. It's very strange having poor Lydia act as though you aren't here at all. As you wish, Miss Euphemia. Lord Blackthorn snapped his fingers, and the rose at his throat curled inward just a bit. Lydia shrieked and leapt up from her bed, staring at the elf as though she'd never seen him before. Quiet, Lydia. Effie urged her quickly. Keep it down, or else Mrs. Sedgwick will put us in the scullery. Lydia clapped a hand over her own mouth, but she kept her eyes fixed upon Lord Blackthorn, with a terrified expression on her face. Lord Blackthorn now offered out the paper-wrapped package to Effie, and she took it with wordless resignation. The package was far heavier than it appeared, however, and she buckled beneath its weight. Effie quickly set the package down onto her bed, blinking at it in astonishment. What on earth is this? She asked. It is your dress. Lord Blackthorn said. His tone was now a mixture of pride and self-consciousness. I do hope that it will suffice. I know that you could sew something much grander on your own, but we only have so much time, after all. Effie undid the knot on the package and pulled the paper back curiously. The very edge of the fabric showed, and she dropped her mouth in astonishment. The dress inside was a creamy, parchment sort of color, with embroidery of inky black and bright golden thread. "Are you having me on?" she managed. "I couldn't possibly sew anything like this." "I was worried that was the case." Lord Blackthorn sighed heavily. "No matter. I will go back and ask the brownies to redo it. Perhaps they will be more adept with a different material." "No, no." Effie hastened to correct him. "It's beautiful, please. I meant that I couldn't sew something this lovely if I tried, is all." Lord Blackthorn laughed with relief. "Oh, is that all?" he said. "How silly. I keep mistaking your humility, Miss Euphemia. I should know better by now, I am sure. But do not worry, this dress is merely temporary, until a better one can be made." Lydia crept her way carefully over toward the package, still watching Lord Blackthorn with a careful expression. As she came within sight of the dress inside, however, Lydia gasped audibly. "Oh, how pretty," she said. "What's that material, then? I've never seen it before." Lord Blackthorn waved a hand dismissively. "The dress is only made of dignity," he said. "There are better materials to be had, of course, but this is what the brownies had on hand. They were only too happy to rid themselves of it. They consider it quite useless, for all of the trouble that it brings." Effie blinked uncertainly. She said. "But, it is very lovely, isn't it?" Lord Blackthorn chuckled. "I suppose it is that," he agreed. "Which should suffice for our purposes, at least for tonight." He glanced curiously around the room then, as though searching for something. At first, Effie found herself self-conscious about the dour, cramped state of the bedroom which she shared with Lydia, but the furnishings did not seem to concern Lord Blackthorn, who merely shook his head and pulled a small glass vial from his jacket pocket. "I was going to suggest that you should take this with tea," he advised Effie, as he pressed the vial into her hand. "But there is no time. I fear I have little idea how it will taste." Effie glanced down at the vial with trepidation. The glass vial was filled with a scintillating liquid that glowed with golden light. "Apologies, Mr. Jubilee," she said. "But what is it I'm supposed to be drinking?" "That," Lord Blackthorn said triumphantly, "is 100 days' worth of proper elocution. It is not a local accent, I fear, but I believe that it should more than suffice." Effie hesitated and glanced toward Lydia, who shook her head minutely. But really, what was Effie to do other than drink the strange liquid? Lord Blackthorn seemed so proud of his acquisition, and Effie was sure that she could not win this bizarre wager if she didn't sound like a noblewoman. "It's far too late to be having qualms now," Effie thought with a sigh. She popped the cork from the vial and downed it in one smooth swallow. The golden liquid wasn't really liquid at all. In fact, it felt a bit like swallowing light. Effie's throat tickled strangely, and she coughed a few times to clear it. "That is an exceptionally odd feeling, oh." Effie pressed her hand over her mouth in shock. The voice that had spoken was hers, but the words and accents sounded suddenly much closer to something she might hear from Lady Culver. Lydia widened her eyes. "You're a toff, Effie," she gasped in delight. "Say something else, quick." Effie floundered for a moment, oddly at a loss for something to say. Finally, she settled herself on a nursery rhyme. "Oranges and lemons. Ring the bells at St. Clement's. When will you pay me? Ring the bells at Old Bailey. When I am rich. Ring the bells at Fleet Ditch." Each sentence was perfectly formed, with round vowels and an elegant lilt. Effie dissolved into elated laughter before she could continue, and even that was a pleasant sort of laughter, compared to her normal, snorting giggles. "I am a toff." Effie laughed, in that perfectly proper accent. "Would you just listen to that?" "Excellent," Lord Blackthorn said. "Everything seems to be in working order, then. Now, if you will only put on your dress, Miss Euphemia, we can be off before the party has gone for too long." Lord Blackthorn stepped outside for a moment while Effie unwrapped the dress. The material was so heavy that she had to get Lydia's help just to pull it over her head, but once the dress settled somewhat, it was easier to walk about in it. There were slippers with it, but these were heavy as well, and Effie had to walk very carefully in them in order to keep her balance. You look like a proper princess, Lydia sighed. Only, your hair, Effie. We really have to do something about it. Effie reached up toward her hair self-consciously. She had brushed it through already, but it was still a bit tangled and ragged at the ends. There was no way they were going to be able to put it up properly in time for the ball. Can you stick it up with a ribbon, Lydia? Effie asked in a small voice. I can't see it for myself, is all. Lydia did her best, but even as Effie stepped outside the room, she knew it wasn't enough. Her hands were rough from housework too, and the gloves she'd used to cover them were tatty at the edges. Still, Lord Blackthorn's face lit up as he saw her, as though he had created a work of art. Perfect, he crowed. You shall woo your baron's son for certain, Miss Euphemia. He offered out his arm. Effie took it with more than a little bit of discomfort. The scent of roses that he carried with him should have been overwhelming, up close, but it was actually quite pleasant. You're escorting me, Mr. Jubilee? Effie asked worriedly. The sound of her perfect elocution startled her again, but she recovered herself quickly. That really isn't done, I have to say. Most ladies show up to balls with a proper chaperone. Lord Blackthorn's smile lost a bit of its luster. Of course, foolish me, he sighed. It is far too late to ask for Lady Morningwood to accompany us. I am so sorry, Miss Euphemia, I have made a mess of this first attempt, but we will make do, as I said, and the next time will be far better, I assure you. Lord Blackthorn turned towards the bedroom, where Lydia still stood, watching after them with horrified fascination. Miss Euphemia requires a proper chaperone, he said gravely. I would be most obliged if you could serve that role, miss. Lydia widened her eyes. Me, she squeaked. But I'm not, I can't. Lord Blackthorn shook his head thoughtfully. It seemed that he was barely listening to Lydia's protests. There is nothing to do for your dress, I say, what an addle-pate I am, but I should be able to glamour you both. It will not sort out your elocution, but it will smooth away the strange edges of things. You shall simply have to be a silent chaperone. Lydia backed away through the door, as though to take shelter beneath the useless mistletoe that she had hung there. I really can't, sir, she pleaded. I'm just a maid. But of course you can. Lord Blackthorn exulted. Why, I ask for your help especially because you are a maid. All of the maids that I have met have been the very best examples of English virtue, and so I consider it a high recommendation. He offered out his other hand to Lydia, with an encouraging smile. I do hope you will save me from my foolish mistake, miss. I will owe you a favor for the trouble, of course. I will be only too happy to pay it, in return for your kindness. Lydia pressed her lips together at this. Her eyes were now uncertain, though Effie suspected that the other maid was more tempted by the earnest sincerity in Lord Blackthorn's voice than by anything else. I could very much use a chaperone, Lydia, Effie said softly. I only have so much time to win my wager. Lydia sighed heavily. Oh, all right then, she said. Just for tonight. How virtuous of you, truly, Lord Blackthorn said. I am so pleased to have met you both. I can already tell that I will learn much of English virtue from you. Effie felt something wind around her wrist then, and she jumped with a gasp. When she glanced down, she saw that there was a rose vine there, quite similar to the one that Lord Blackthorn wore himself. Its thorns pricked uncomfortably at her skin, but the single yellow rose that blossomed there set the same wild, refreshing scent into the air that his did, and she found herself breathing its perfume in deeply. Lydia squeaked again, and Effie knew that the other maid had been gifted a similar flower. There now. Lord Blackthorn said with satisfaction. That is as good as we shall get for the evening. Do remember not to speak this evening, miss, or people will notice that your accent is strange for a chaperone. Lord Blackthorn took them along the servants' passageways, as though there were nothing strange at all about their departure. They came upon Mrs. Sedgwick in the passages, puttering worriedly about in her silk gown, and Effie sucked in her breath with fear, but the housekeeper merely blinked at them and nodded vaguely, and they passed her without incident. Whatever else Lord Blackthorn had forgotten, he had remembered to procure them a carriage. The one that awaited them outside was made of tightly woven rose vines, with blossoms peeking out from every angle. It was a bit fierce-looking, in fact, with all of its impressive thorns, but Lord Blackthorn helped them each inside the carriage in a gentlemanly manner, and Effie discovered that it was perfectly comfortable inside. The cushions were all made of velvet, like Lord Blackthorn's jacket, and the ride was surprisingly smooth, though Effie preferred not to dwell too much upon the fact that it moved without the aid of any horses. "Now, as to our strategy," Lord Blackthorn said, as soon as the two of them had settled inside. "I am sure that you will catch Mr Benedict's eye all on your own, Miss Euphemia, but let us be certain. I can rid us of all of the other ladies at the ball, so that you are the only one left." Effie widened her eyes. "No," she burst out. "No, that's quite all right. I would rather you didn't do anything to the other ladies, Mr Jubilee." Effie did not need to ask the fairy how exactly he intended to rid them of an entire room full of women. She already knew she would not like the answer. Lord Blackthorn frowned at that. "I see," he sighed. "You would prefer a fair playing field. I do wish that you were less noble, Miss Euphemia, but I respect your desires nonetheless. Do let me know if you change your mind. I must also practice being cruel to the powerful, and I have yet to approach the matter at all." "Cruel to the powerful?" Lydia asked. "What do you mean by that?" The other maid had been sitting in the corner of the carriage with a quiet, wary manner, but she couldn't seem to help her interest in the current conversation. Lord Blackthorn smiled at Lydia. "I am trying to be more virtuous," he said. "I am told it entails two things. I believe I have done a passable job of being kind to the powerless, but I have not yet thought on how to be cruel to the powerful at all." Lydia snorted. "I've got endless thoughts on that," she said. "All you had to do was ask." Effie shook her head quickly at Lydia, but Lord Blackthorn had straightened with interest. "Well," he said. "I shall ask, then. How would you go about being cruel to the powerful, miss?" Lydia glanced past him, toward Effie's stricken face. I'll think more on it," Lydia demurred hastily. "I ought to give you the right thoughts, after all. And we're here for Effie right now." Lord Blackthorn nodded seriously. "Yes, quite right," he agreed. "Let us first see Miss Euphemia happily married." The carriage came to a pause. Lord Blackthorn exited first, in order to offer them each a hand down. The end.